everyone, welcome back to the Zach GP channel, and this is your post-Sprint Quali final thoughts for F1 Fantasy before the deadline for the sprint race. Now, if you're new to the channel, this video is hard and fast information just to give you the best strategies and best teams for these final hours heading in to the deadline, now knowing what Sprint Quali look like, meaning that we have the best information possible to select your teams. Now, quickly before I get this video started, below me on here is what every driver needs to increase/decrease in value in the Miami Grand Prix, and you'll really want to keep an eye on these numbers because they are so crucial in building budget in F1 Fantasy. But don't worry, these will be shown throughout the full video when you can see my face. But anyway, let's get into the list of assets you should use after Sprint Quali. Now, as per usual, if I do not bring up a name, that means you do not bring them into your team. So starting off with the A-tier drivers, and it really was only going to be Oscar Piastri, the person you should have brought in, good on budget and good on points. However, now with Kimi Antonelli looking very spicy in first place for Sprint Quali, I very much like him as a differential. He'll give you decent budget building potential for an A-tier driver, and points-wise, he could be a massive differential for anyone who could afford him. But A-tier driver-wise, that is it. Now for A-tier constructors, again, it's just McLaren and Mercedes. Now we were thinking about Ferrari, however, I don't think from the looks of things their pit stops are going to save them this weekend. So realistically, you just want to have McLaren and Mercedes in your team. Then B-tier driver wise, from my favourite to least favourite, even though all of these are usable, would be Ollie Behrman, Isaac Hadjar, Esteban Ocon, Alonso, Bortoleto, and Liam Lawson. Now, all of these look good for budget building, so no matter who you put in is great. The reason I like Bortoleto is because he can't lose value, being at 4.5 million threshold. But realistically, if you have 3 or 4 of these cheap assets in your team, you're going to do brilliantly for your budget in F1 Fantasy. Then finally, B-tier constructors, and you have the main one, which is still Haas because it's safe on the budget building. Realistically, if you still have a B-tier constructor in your team, it means you're budget building, so it doesn't matter too much about the points and you just want to be safe with the Haas team. However, if you want to go for a bit more risk and go for those points, Williams is on the cards as well, especially with how low Carlos Sainz qualified, and it seems like there's more pace than 15th in that car. Now, heading into the chips for Miami, and realistically, there is one big one that most people will be using this weekend, and it is the Limitless. Now, I'll show you my Limitless team now and in the team selection. However, right now, as of after the Sprint Quali results, seeing how dominant Mercedes actually looked compared to the likes of Ferrari and Red Bull, it now means my Limitless has changed to Norris, Piastri, Antonelli, Russell, and Verstappen with McLaren and Mercedes. Now, I still think you should put your 2 times on one of the McLaren boys. I'm still going for Lando Norris 2 times at the minute, as it's still a big differential play, as most teams won't have Lando Norris, so if he scores big, that means your Limitless will score even more points compared to the normal team. However, it is a bit risky, so if you do just want to play it safe, go for Oscar Piastri. And then finally, the only other chip I'd recommend is if you still have wildcard, this is the opportunity to set up your team perfectly for Imola next race weekend when you have to use the Limitless for getting your budget right and for getting some good points in a sprint. However, the rest of them, such as No Negative, Autopilot, Extra DRS, Final Fix, I recommend using at a later date. Now, heading into the team selections, I'll start off with the normal teams and I'll go on to the Limitless team. However, it is now very much confirmed in my head that the Piastri, McLaren, Mercedes teams are the way to go. Now, the best cheap drivers to put with these teams would cost you 108.9 million with Ocon, Behrman, Alonso, and Hadjar. However, what just shows the variety of teams we can have in F1 Fantasy now is if you don't have 108.9 million in your bank and you've only got 100.8 million in your bank, the Piastri, McLaren, Mercedes team with Bortoleto, Doohan, Alonso, and Hadjar. Now, realistically, this is just the foundations, as I would highly recommend not using Jack Doohan. And for me, I would say if you have enough money to go from Doohan to Lawson, do that. And if you have enough money from Lawson to go to Behrman, you do those steps. Now, you might realize I haven't added Alex Albon to any of these teams. Now, he does look good. It's just his price tag that is a bit alarming. He really struggles on budget building. And is it worth putting that much money into a B-tier asset? I don't think so, considering he won't score that many more points and his budget's not going to go up any higher, probably even less than all of these drivers I just mentioned. Now, if you are still budget building, which means you probably have around 105, 106 million and you need to catch up to the rest of us, I would actually still recommend going to the Piastri, McLaren, Mercedes, as you're going to miss out on a lot of big points this weekend, as it's a sprint race weekend, meaning there's more points on offer as there's an extra session for getting points on. However, if you don't go for the Piastri McLaren Mercedes team, you can go for the Piastri McLaren Haas. Again, Haas don't look incredible for points. However, they're so safe budget-wise. They actually need negative points to not go up 0.6 million this weekend. It's just a fail-safe, easy way to get 0.6 million. And again, if you want to counteract some of those lost points, you can, if you're setting up a team for Imola, do something like I did in Jeddah, where you actually have Piastri alongside Russell or Piastri alongside Antonelli. However, again, I cannot stress this enough, because the constructors basically get both of the drivers' points combined. It really does mean that Mercedes coming into this weekend look like a steal, and you have to have them in your team. Then finally, before I talk about the Limitless team again, I would like to talk about a team that did come up, which is the Piastri McLaren Ferrari team. Now, I was quite on board with this because of pit stop points. However, I don't actually think 15 points will save Ferrari this weekend if that is what their pace is. So for right now, and until the deadline, I think I'm off Team Ferrari, and I think Mercedes is where you should be putting your money. And then, sort of like I mentioned as well, going back to the budget building team, I would recommend sticking with Piastri and Russell, or Piastri and Antonelli, if you could afford to increase those with the McLaren and Haas builds, instead of having Norris with 4 cheap assets. Because yes, with Norris not being absolutely dominant, I still don't think it's worth using him in a normal team for now. And then finally, I'll re-show my Limitless team once again, just in case you missed it. It looks like Norris, Piastri, Russell, Antonelli, Verstappen, McLaren, Mercedes. Now, it does worry me a little bit with the SQs floating around F1 quite a bit. All of our eggs in one basket. However, you've got to make tough calls and risk it for a chocolate biscuit sometimes in F1 Fantasy, and that is exactly what I think you should be doing in Limitless. However, let's say you do want to have a Ferrari asset, it would be Leclerc. I'd recommend replacing Russell instead if you want to have a little bit of variation just in case anything goes wrong. But anyway, that is all for this video. Make sure to join my league over at the Fantasy Formula. You can find us on the featured league, or I will have the league link in my description down below and in the comments. Again, if you do F1 Predicts as well, I do F1 Predicts on my Everything You Need to Know video. Join us over there. We have over 150 people in that league as well. Again, like the Fantasy Formula, you can find that link in my description. Follow my Twitter, follow my TikTok, join my Discord, as we all have good conversations over there. And that is all. I really hope the weekend goes well for everyone. And just remember, it is a big weekend for F1 Fantasy. However, try to keep a cool head, as this game is intended to make the F1 weekend more enjoyable. So please just try to enjoy it as much as possible. I know it can be a little bit annoying with DNFs. I know I'm a bit of a hypocrite here, because I probably will be sulking if I get a -20. However, I really hope it goes well for everyone. Comment down below if you have any more questions for your team, as I will be getting to hopefully every comment I see. However, this video will be going out at around the time I'll be going to sleep, so realistically for the first 5-6 hours, don't be worried if I don't respond to anything, as I'll wake up and then respond to more. And make sure to follow me on the Deadline show over on FanAmp, where we will discuss more of your teams and comments over there. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you all later.